Well, thank you for being here today. It's nice to see so many of you got here on the first day of daylight savings time. I know that's tough to get up early in the morning. I'm not a big fan of daylight savings time. I find it disruptive, especially the part where, like today, you have to get up an hour earlier. But I do like the idea of saving time. And I don't mean finding ways to do things faster. That's not really saving time. That's just rushing life. But wouldn't it be nice if you could really save time? Say, I'm not really planning on doing anything important between 2 and 3 this afternoon. I think I'll just put that hour aside and use it later when I need it. But I think that would be really cool, but unfortunately you can't do that any more than you can save a breath for later. And I use that idea sometimes when I'm teaching meditation. If you're not paying attention to a breath, you don't get to do it again. So if your plan was to contemplate your breath, and a breath goes by without you noticing it, that breath is gone. You don't get to concentrate on that breath. Not ever. It's gone for good. And if you were concentrating on your breath and you really, really liked one, like every once in a while your attention, well, you know how it goes, your attention will fall into place just right. And a single breath will feel really, really good, like the most pleasant thing you've ever experienced. And it'd be nice if you could say, oh, I want to breathe that breath again. But no dice. You'll just have to enjoy a different breath because that breath has gone. So I see this as a metaphor for life. You get each moment, each hour, each day, only one time. And so I thought this being the first day of daylight savings time would be a good idea to talk about the idea of being mindful of time. By the way, as far as I know, there's no traditional practice called mindfulness of time. The Buddha talks extensively about the foundations of mindfulness, and he doesn't specifically mention time anywhere in that discourse. But that doesn't mean that we can't practice it or shouldn't practice it. It just means I have to define it. And so to me, I think mindfulness of time would include kind of 3 main themes. First, it would be awareness in the present moment of the preciousness of that particular moment. And then second would be awareness in the moment that the past is unchangeable. And awareness in the moment that everything that's not in the past is inevitably going to change. So there's one thing that I've noticed recently about the passing of time. I've been doing this long enough now that I've reached a point where it's difficult to not repeat myself. And I find myself outlining a sermon and I'll think of a story that I think would fit. And I think, wait a minute, haven't I told that story before? And it's kind of interesting to see myself thinking of a concept like before, as if it is somehow a tangible thing that isn't specific to my unique experience, but has a life of its own. And then when I look at that realistically, I see that there's relatively little likelihood that if I told a particular story 3 years ago, that everyone, or anyone for that matter, would have heard it or remember it the way I do. Anyway, I've told this story before. So if you heard it 3 or 4 years ago, it probably won't bore you too much to hear it again in a different context. I find this a little hard to believe sometimes, but I've been going to Tomoka Correctional Institution now for over 10 years. And you become very aware in a place like that where people will talk about doing time, this idea of time, the passing of time. So one day, after I'd been going there for a couple of years, this inmate named Raleigh came up to me at the end of a meeting, and he wanted to tell me that he was being transferred. And he's since been released, by the way. Whenever I'm going to talk about one of these guys, I look them up to find out where they're at if I don't happen to know. And he's been on probation for some time and for a few years now, so apparently has gotten out and remained out, which is a happy thing. Anyway, Raleigh was not Buddhist. He was a devout Christian, but he was a chapel clerk. And so part of his duties, he would be kind of floating around while we were doing stuff. And so he kind of started hearing what we were talking about. And then when he had time, he started sitting in on our services. And so he wanted me to know that he had learned a couple of important things from listening to us talk about Buddhism that he planned to take with him to his new location. He said, as you can imagine, a lot of the guys in here spend a lot of time living in the past. They're remembering the good times that they had, the good things that they did before, or they're regretting the things that they did that got them in here. He says, and the rest of the guys are living in the future, thinking about how long it is before they can get out, or imagining these great things that they're going to do sometime in the future. So one thing that I've learned from you guys, if I want to be happy, I have to do it right now. And then he said the other thing that he had learned was to be careful what he did with his mind. So I realized my mind is like a garden. To be very careful what I plant in there. If I plant bad seeds, that's what's going to grow. If I want good things to grow, I have to plant good seeds. So there's a couple lessons here that connect to this idea of mindfulness of time. And the first is that if you want to be happy, you have to do it in the present. And second is that if you want to be happy in the future, you need to be mindful of what you're doing right now. Because what you're doing right now is going to grow and eventually ripen. And then I'm going to add a third thing to this. The present moment rests atop an infinite number of other moments. And those moments stretch back to what we call beginningless time. And you can't undo a single one of them. So like Raleigh recognized, being mindful of time means being aware that the past is gone and the future is uncertain. So this moment is where life happens. But we should also accept that we are affected by the past. We don't want to live in the past. Regret's a really good learning tool, but it's not a good place to stay for very long. And the same is true over anger for things that were done or said to us. We can't change what's already happened. So we need to accept in this moment the way it is. There's three things that we can't control, and the past is one of them. We can't control what feelings arise in our consciousness. We can't control other people. We can't control what's already happened. But we can largely control our responses to these things. So we can learn from our past mistakes, appreciate past kindnesses, and let go in this moment of what we need to let go of. So if we're aware that the present is a product of past actions, then we realize that our present affect our future. We can't live in the future either, though, because it's uncertain. We can affect what might grow and ripen in the seasons ahead. So, last month I had hit one of those milestone birthdays, and I've been sick a lot this winter with respiratory stuff, as you could probably tell. When I was a kid, I had chronic bronchitis, and then I had asthma, and my lungs kind of react sort of badly when I get sick or when there's a lot of pollen and that kind of thing. And my mom's in the hospital. She's okay, don't worry about it, but she's having this sort of ongoing bout with digestive issues that go way back to her childhood. And so I started thinking a lot about what seeds I'm planting now with regards to my health and how they might ripen in the future, what I might do. Things are going to change. That's inevitable. You feel really great one week and then end up with the flu the next. It doesn't matter, regardless of what I eat or how much I exercise and that sort of thing. Those things happen. But I'd like to minimize the chance that I spend a lot of time in the hospital when I get older. So now I'm looking at what I can do to prevent disease in the coming years, how to be more physically resilient. But at the same time, I'm working on being more spiritually resilient. And this relates to this idea of being mindfulness of time also. So let me explain what I mean by spiritual resilience. Think about being physically healthy. What does that mean? It means you feel generally pretty good most of the time. You can do most of the things that you want to do most of the time. But it also means that if you get sick, which is going to happen, that happens even to healthy people, spend a minimal amount of time suffering. Symptoms might not be as bad as they would be if you were unhealthy, and you tend to return to health fairly quickly. And being spiritually resilient is kind of similar. You're still going to experience difficulties in life, but you'll minimize the amount of suffering that you do in response to misfortune, and you tend to feel better sooner. In Buddhism, this spiritual resilience comes from awakening to what we call the four seals of the Dharma. And the first is that life contains difficulties. The second is that everything changes. The third is that it's really not all about me. And the fourth is that life is fundamentally good. If we understand and accept these realities, then we may encounter life's difficulties. We're able to ride them out, and we return more quickly to feelings of calmness and joy. There's a sutra where the Buddha talks about this. He says there are 8 worldly conditions that spin after the world, and the world spins after these conditions. I like the way he puts that. The world spins and everything changes. Everything changes and the world continues to spin. Anyway, these 8 worldly conditions that he talks about are gain and loss, status and disgrace, censure and praise, pleasure and pain. And he points out that gain, loss, status, disgrace, censure, praise, pleasure, and pain arise for everyone, whether you're spiritually awake or not. But when gain arises for what he calls an uninstructed person, someone who's unaware of those 4 realities, he doesn't reflect gain has arisen, it's inconstant, stressful, and subject to change. The Buddha says the mind remains consumed with the gain, so we expect this good fortune to last and to be a lasting source of happiness. It's the same when we experience a rise in status, when we are praised, when we experience pleasure. We tend to expect these situations to last, so when they change, as they will, we suffer as a result. But the same thing happens when loss arises, and disgrace, censure, or pain. We expect those situations to last too. Pain arises, the Buddha says, and one doesn't reflect pain has arisen. It's inconstant, stressful, and subject to change. And because you don't discern it as it actually is, the mind remains consumed with pain. So we welcome the arisen gain and we rebel against arisen pain. And as a consequence, we experience more suffering and stress than we need to. So when we accept those realities, though, it's a different story. We see reality as it is. We know that gain is inconstant, stressful, and subject to change, but so are difficulties. So it's true for good fortune or bad. When pain arises, we see it as it is. The mind doesn't remain consumed with difficulties. We don't get caught up in clinging to the pleasant or pushing away the unpleasant, because we know the world will spin and everything will change. So he finishes this discourse with this verse: gain, loss, status, disgrace, censure, praise, pleasure, pain. These conditions among human beings are inconstant, impermanent, subject to change. Knowing this, the wise person, mindful, ponders these changing conditions. Desirable things don't charm the mind. Undesirable ones bring no resistance. His welcoming and rebelling are scattered, gone to their end. David Bowie comments on this same phenomenon, sort of being accepting of impermanence in his song Changes. You probably all know that Bowie died in January, but you might not know he was a Buddhist. Apparently there was a Tibetan Buddhist center that opened in or around London in the 60s, and Bowie just kind of happened in there and had a conversation with the Lama there and ended up becoming very interested in Buddhism. And he is actually going to ordain. And the Lama said, no, you'd be a much better musician than me. But he's talking at the beginning of this song about being unaware of these 4 realities. He says, my time was running wild, a million dead-end streets. Every time I thought I got it made, it seemed the taste was not so sweet. And then later on in the song, talking about accepting the inevitability of change. I watch the ripples change their size, but never leave the stream of warm impermanence. And so the days float through my eyes, but the days still seem the same. So our reference point, to mindfulness of time is this moment right here. We have a past, we have a future, and those are important. But what we can affect is right now, right here. This is the only place where we can experience either the teachings of the past or prepare for the ripening of the future. So when I went to Vermont for my residential in Japanese psychology, our first assignment was to calculate the number of days we had left to live. Wow. Yeah, the average human life spans 30,000 days. I actually messed up in the email I sent you. It said 20,000. It's 30,000. About 82 years. And each day that passes is one less that remains. So So what we had to do is figure out how many days we'd lived so far, and then subtract that number from 30,000. And so by that calculation, as of this morning, I have 8,048 days. 8,000 seems like a pretty big number, but to be honest, when I look at what I would like to accomplish with the rest of my life, it doesn't seem like nearly enough. It'd be nice to have a storehouse of days that I didn't use very productively, so I could use them again more wisely. But there's no way to bank a day for the future. This particular day is the only day that we know for certain is ours. So it's up to us to decide how best to live each day, rather than to just go along for the ride. I can't give you a step-by-step prescription for how to do that, because we all play different roles in life. We all have different purposes. So to live wisely means something different for you than it does for me. But the best thing I can suggest is that you consider what your purpose is or your purposes are, and check in with yourself once in a while and see if what you're doing is in alignment with those roles that are most important to you. But the other thing is a little simpler. Periodically, just stop what you're doing, take a breath. Live that one breath very fully. Use that breath to appreciate what it means to be who you are, where you are, doing what you're doing.